And she paid me up to the end of the month. That's the last I ever saw of her, until I recognized this picture this morning. It was that afternoon that Mrs. Lancaster was murdered, and the whole neighborhood thrown in a state of frenzy. Mrs. McMullen was interested, not only because of the crime, but because Miss Merriam had given Miss Emily as a reference. The general belief was that a homicidal maniac was loose, and along with a good many others the landlady inspected her window locks, and in addition she had put a chain across her front door the next morning. Some of my people didn't like it, she explained. I put it on at 9 every night, and after that they had to ring the bell. Their keys were no good to them. But I did it to protect them as well as myself, and when that killer got Miss Emily herself on Sunday night, they stopped fussing. She still, she said, had no idea that Miss Emily and Miss Merriam were the same woman. She was shocked nevertheless, because only last spring I'd talked to her over the telephone. It was as if I knew her, if you see what I mean. But on Sunday night she had had real reason to be thankful for the chain. It was about 3 o'clock in the morning and she was in the lower hall. Miss Anderson on the second floor had a toothache, and I'd offered to go down and heat some water for a hot water bottle. I know my house pretty well, so I didn't turn on a light, and I was in my slippers, and they don't make any noise. Well, I was down at the foot of the stairs when I heard somebody at the front door fumbling with the lock. All my people were in, and they knew about the chain anyhow. I was scared, but I stood still and watched, and that door opened. It opened as far as the chain would let it. Then, I couldn't help it, I guess, I yelled, and it slammed shut again. You didn't see anybody? No, miss, and I'd be glad if you kept it to yourself. I don't want my roomers leaving. I nodded absently, I'm afraid, for I was busy thinking. On Sunday night Holmes was locked in our guest room, and he was still there when I unlocked his door the next morning. Then it could hardly have been Holmes at that door and thwarted by that chain. Then who? Mrs. McMullen was in no doubt, apparently. I guess I'd have yelled louder if I'd known Miss Merriam was Emily Lancaster and that he'd killed her that very night, she said, trying to smile. It's easy to see what happened, Miss Hall, isn't it? Whoever it was, he killed her to get that key, and I can only thank God that my chain held. But of course she still did not know Miss Merriam's real identity, and she only wondered why she had not come to her room since the Thursday before. I thought maybe she'd gone away, as she said, she explained. But that seemed queer with her trunk still locked in that room of hers. And then, after this long preamble, she reached the trunk itself. It had been taken away the night before, and the word had been brought at noon by a liveried chauffeur with a limousine at the curb. Naturally, she had suspected nothing out of the way. Up the steps he came, as bold as brass, and he said to me that Miss Miriam's old lady was going out of town in a hurry, and that she'd send for her trunk that night. And what about getting into the room for it? I said she'll have to send her key. He said he would get the key, and that was all. She had not been surprised when he himself came for the trunk with a light truck. He had a Negro helper, and the two went up the stairs. He had the key right enough, as she said, but the trunk was heavy and he himself was a small man. It had stuck too at the turn of the stairs, and finally she herself had gone out on the street, found a white man loitering on the pavement, and brought him in. The three of them got the trunk out and into the truck, she said, and that's all I know, except that he paid the helpers off and drove away by himself. She took a handkerchief out of her bag and wiped her face with it. I could see that she was trembling. "Well, that's all, Miss Hall," she said, getting slowly to her feet. I let him take the trunk. How was I to know that this Miriam woman was Miss Lancaster, or that she was dead? I gave it to him, and the police can believe it or not. I don't know what was in it and I don't care. Let them get him and they'll get it. They'll never get him, Mrs. McMullen, I said gravely. I'm afraid he is dead. And I was astounded to see her crumple up in a dead faint, on the floor at my feet. She came around before very long, after Mary over my protests had dashed a teacup of ice water in her face. She was dazed at first, gazing at us all with blank eyes, but soon she oriented herself and tried to sit up. I'm sorry, miss, she began. I don't know when I've done such a thing.